The night I met Adrian Vale, I learned that not every storm comes to destroy you. Some of them drag you somewhere you were always meant to go. Rain slammed against the city like it had something personal to prove, hard enough to blur the streetlights into streaks of gold and white across the windshield. My hands shook on the steering wheel so badly I could barely keep the car between the lines, and every time I checked the rearview mirror, his headlights were still there. Same silver sedan. Same relentless distance. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough to remind me that leaving him had been the most dangerous thing I had ever done. My phone kept buzzing in the passenger seat, bright little flashes of his name cutting through the dark. Ryan. 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 I didn't need to read the messages to know what they said. I knew his patterns better than I knew my own heartbeat. First anger, then apology, then blame, then that cold promise that made every breath feel borrowed. I pressed harder on the gas, but my old Honda answered with a tired whine, the engine sounding thin and strained beneath the roar of the rain. 40 miles an hour felt like 80 on streets this slick. I should have gone to the police. I knew that. I had known it for months. But fear makes cowards out of smart women, and love, or whatever broken version of it I had been living inside, makes liars out of us too. I had spent 2 years explaining away things I should have run from the first time. His temper, his rules, the way every argument somehow became my fault, the way I started apologizing before I even knew what I'd done wrong. Tonight was supposed to be the end of it. I had waited until he left for work, packed one duffel bag, grabbed the cash I'd been hiding in an old cereal box, and driven straight out of the apartment complex without looking back. For almost 20 minutes, I thought I had made it. Then his car appeared behind me like a sentence I couldn't outrun. Thunder rolled over Manhattan, low and heavy, rattling my ribs. I turned off Lexington too fast, my tires slipping as I cut down a side street lined with dark glass buildings and iron gates. My windshield wipers could barely keep up. Water sheeted over the glass in wild silver waves, and for one awful second I couldn't see anything at all. Then the road opened in front of me, and I spotted the entrance to an underground garage tucked beneath a high-rise with no sign out front. Just polished black stone and a pair of security lights glowing through the rain. Instinct took over. I jerked the wheel and swung into the entrance lane, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The gate was halfway down when I jumped out of the car. Please, I gasped, already soaked through, my sneakers splashing in ankle-deep runoff. Please, just let me in. I didn't know who I was talking to. Security camera. Doorman. God. My hand slipped on the metal post beside the gate, and pain flashed sharp across my palm. I looked down and saw a thin line of red mixing with rainwater, running over my skin and dripping to the concrete below. Great. Perfect. My whole body was trembling now, from cold or panic or both. Behind me, I heard tires screech at the curb. Ryan had found me. My breath caught. I turned just as the garage gate paused, then slowly began to rise again. Warm amber light spilled out from below like something unreal. And then a black SUV rolled up from the underground level, silent and sleek as a shadow. The driver's door opened first, then the rear passenger door. A man stepped out in a dark coat that looked too expensive for weather like this, tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly calm. Rain hit him, but somehow he looked untouched by it. He took one glance at my face, then at the blood on my hand, and his expression changed in a way I felt more than understood. Not softer, more dangerous. Who did this? He asked. I opened my mouth to lie. Then Ryan's voice tore through the rain behind me, furious and getting closer. The stranger's eyes lifted past my shoulder, and whatever silence lived in him turned cold enough to stop the storm. Stay behind me, the stranger said, and something in his voice made my body obey before my mind caught up. I stepped back automatically, my wet sneakers slipping on the concrete as the garage lights painted everything in gold and shadow. Ryan was already crossing the sidewalk toward us, rain plastering. His dark hair to his forehead, his expression twisted into that familiar look of injured outrage he wore whenever he wanted the world to believe he was the one who had been wronged. Claire, he called, breathless and angry at the same time. There you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. My stomach turned. He said my name the way people say grace before dinner, like it belonged to him. You need to come with me. Right now. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The man in front of me did not move much. He did not have to. He simply shifted half a step, enough to block Ryan's view of me almost completely, and suddenly the space between them felt charged. Dangerous in a quiet, expensive way. "She is not going anywhere with you," he said. No raised voice. No theatrics. Just a statement delivered with the kind of certainty that made even the rain feel quieter. Ryan laughed once, sharp and false. "This is between me and my girlfriend." Girlfriend. The word landed like a bruise. I saw the stranger's shoulders go still beneath his coat. "Then your problem," he said evenly, "is that she does not look like she wants to speak to you." Ryan finally looked at him properly, and I watched the first flicker of doubt cross his face. The stranger was not just another rich guy coming home late from a dinner meeting. Everything about him said control. The black SUV idling behind him. The men near the elevator entrance who had appeared so silently, I had not noticed them until now. The way one security guard by the gate stopped pretending not to watch. Ryan tried a different expression, softening his voice, dragging concern over it like a sheet over broken furniture. "Claire, come on. You are upset. I get that. Let us just go home and talk." Home. My pulse jumped so hard it made my injured hand throb. He took one step closer, and I flinched before I could stop myself. The stranger saw it. I knew he saw it because his eyes changed, growing colder, more focused, as if some last small uncertainty had just been removed. "You should leave," he told Ryan. "Now." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Do you know who you are talking to?" For the first time, the man in front of me smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Yes," he said. "The better question is whether you know who you are talking to." Silence followed that, broken only by thunder somewhere over the river and the steady hiss of rain hitting concrete. Ryan looked past him, toward the garage, the SUV, the men in dark coats, and I saw the exact moment his confidence faltered. He covered it quickly, straightening his jacket, trying to regain whatever performance he thought would save him. "Claire," he said again, forcing calm into my name. "If you leave with strangers in the middle of the night, do not expect me to keep cleaning up your messes." I should have felt guilty. That was how this always worked. He frightened me, then made me ashamed of being frightened. But standing in that pool of amber light with rainwater dripping off my hair and blood drying sticky across my palm, I felt something else instead. Exhaustion. Then anger. Small, shaking, but real. "I am not coming with you," I said. My voice barely rose above the storm, but it was enough. Ryan stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. The stranger glanced at me then, only briefly, but the look in his eyes was not surprise. It was approval. Quiet. Controlled. As if he had been waiting for me to hear my own voice. Ryan's face hardened. "You are making a mistake." "No," the stranger said before I could answer. "She is correcting one." Then he lifted one hand slightly, and the men near the entrance started toward us. Ryan stepped back at once. Not much, just enough for me to realize he was afraid. And I still did not know the name of the man standing between me and the worst night of my life. They did not touch Ryan. They did not need to. The two men approaching from the entrance moved with the calm precision of people who were used to being obeyed, and Ryan read the room faster than I expected. He took another step back, then another, rain dripping from his jaw as he forced a laugh that sounded thin even to me. "This is insane," he muttered, looking at me instead of the man in front of me now. "You are really doing this? You are choosing to embarrass me in front of strangers." The old reflex rose instantly, sharp and humiliating. That instinct to fix things before they broke worse, to apologize just to end the moment. I felt it climb into my throat like a bad habit. But before I could say anything, the stranger beside me spoke again. "She has made herself clear." Ryan's eyes snapped to him. "This does not concern you." "It does now." For simple words. That was all. But something about the way he said them made the air feel denser, as if the city itself had leaned in to listen. Ryan stared at him for a long second, calculating, deciding whether pride was worth whatever consequence he sensed standing in front of him. He must have decided it was not. He pointed at me instead, that familiar gesture, accusatory and possessive all at once. "You always do this, Claire. You create drama, and then you act like I am the problem." The stranger's gaze never left Ryan's face, but his voice dropped lower when he answered. "Leave before I decide your mistake was coming back at all." No anger. That was the unnerving part. Ryan was used to noise, to shouting, to reactions he could use. This man gave him nothing to hold. For a second, I thought Ryan might keep pushing just because he did not know how to stop. Then one of the men at the entrance pulled open his coat enough for Ryan to understand that this building, this garage, this entire stretch of polished stone and amber light, belonged to people with rules he did not want to test. Ryan's mouth tightened. He looked at me one last time, and the softness came back, false and oily. Call me when you calm down. I said nothing. He waited, maybe hoping silence meant hesitation. It did not. Finally, he turned and walked into the rain, shoulders rigid, footsteps splashing across the flooded curb until the darkness swallowed him and the silver sedan pulled away from the street. I kept staring long after the taillights disappeared. My whole body still expected him to come back, to rush the gate, to send another message, to find another way in. He is gone, the stranger said. I looked up at him then, really looked, and the first thing I noticed was how composed he was. Not detached exactly. Controlled. His dark hair was damp from the weather, his coat cut clean and expensive, his face too sharp to be called kind and too calm to be called cruel. He had the sort of presence that made everyone nearby adjust themselves without realizing it. For tonight, I whispered. He studied me for a moment, taking in the soaked sweater stuck to my arms, the blood drying across my palm, the way I kept glancing toward the street like fear might still have a shape. For tonight, he agreed. Then he held out a folded handkerchief, white and perfectly clean, toward my injured hand. You are bleeding. I stared at the cloth for half a heartbeat before taking it. Thank you. My voice sounded small. He noticed that too, I think. He noticed everything. You should come inside, he said. No, I answered too quickly. Warmth, walls, safety, all of it should have sounded tempting. Instead it made panic flutter in my chest. Going inside with a stranger in the middle of the night was not the kind of decision careful women made. But careful women did not end up running through thunderstorms with a split palm and nowhere to go either. His expression did not change. You can stand in the rain if you prefer, he said. But you are shaking, and your hand needs to be cleaned. I looked past him into the garage. Marble floors, soft lights, an elevator bank gleaming at the far end. Men who watched everything and said nothing. A world so far from my own it might as well have been behind glass. Who are you? I asked. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Adrian Vale, he said. The name meant nothing to me then. It should have. And tonight, Claire Bennett, you are under my roof. The elevator ride should have felt short, but every second stretched thin with awareness. Water dripped from the hem of my sweater onto polished black stone, leaving a trail I wanted to apologize for, and the silence inside that mirrored box pressed against my skin almost as much as the damp cold still clinging to me. Adrian stood beside me with one hand in the pocket of his coat, calm as if midnight rescues were part of his regular schedule. He did not crowd me. He did not look at me too much. Somehow that made him harder to understand. Most men took up space like they had purchased the right. Adrian occupied it like the world had offered it first. When the doors opened, I stepped into a private foyer bigger than my entire apartment. Soft gold light spilled across dark hardwood floors. A long wall of windows overlooked the city, rain streaking the glass in silver ribbons. Everything looked expensive in a quiet way, the kind of wealth that did not need to announce itself because it had never once been questioned. I stopped just inside the doorway, clutching the white handkerchief around my palm like it might anchor me. I should not be here, I said. My voice came out hoarse, more tired than afraid now. Adrian turned slightly, watching me with that same unreadable steadiness. No, he said, you should not have been out there. The difference in those two sentences hit me harder than it should have. I had spent so long hearing everything framed as my fault that simple correction felt almost disorienting. Before I could answer, a woman in a dark dress appeared from the far hallway, efficient and composed, maybe in her 50s, with silver at her temples and the kind of presence that made a room feel instantly more orderly. Adrian handed her his coat without looking away from me. Marta, bring a first aid kit and something warm for Miss Bennett. And tea. Miss Bennett. Not girl. Not sweetheart. Not the patronizing little names men used when they wanted to make you smaller. Just my last name, spoken like it mattered. Marta nodded once, her eyes flicking over me with brief concern that never crossed into pity. Of course. She disappeared as quietly as she had arrived. I stood there awkwardly, aware of my soaked clothes, my cheap jeans, the mascara probably smudged beneath my eyes. Adrian loosened the cuffs of his shirt with slow, deliberate motions. Sit. He said it like a request, wearing the clothes of an order. I hesitated anyway. He noticed. Of course he noticed. The sofa is not a trap, Claire. The dry edge in his voice almost made me laugh, which felt so wrong I nearly cried instead. I sank onto the far end of a cream-colored couch that looked far too elegant for someone dripping rainwater and bad decisions all over it. Adrian remained standing for a moment, studying the city through the window as if giving me the kindness of not being watched while I gathered myself. Then he turned back. How long has he been following you? The question came so directly that I flinched. I do not know. A lie, or at least a smaller version of the truth. Adrian leaned one shoulder against the mantel, arms folding across his chest. Then let me ask it differently. How long have you been afraid of him? My throat tightened. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant, but inside everything was still. Too still. Like the apartment itself was waiting. I am not afraid of him, I said automatically. Adrian's gaze dropped to the handkerchief in my lap, already pink at the edges from my palm, then to the way my left foot kept bouncing against the rug. People who are not afraid usually do not run through storms bleeding. I looked away first. Shame came rushing in, hot and immediate. Shame was easier than honesty. Easier than admitting how many times I had promised myself I would leave and then stayed because the apologies sounded sincere, or the tears looked real, or I was simply too worn down to fight. Marta returned then with a tray, steam curling up from a porcelain cup and a small leather case tucked beneath her arm. Relief flickered through me so sharply it almost hurt. Adrian took the first aid kit from her and crossed the room. Give me your hand, he said. I froze. His eyes lifted to mine, and his voice softened just enough to change everything. I am not going to hurt you. I do not know why I believed him. Maybe because he had not asked me to believe anything else. Maybe because all night, he had only moved closer when I was the one about to fall apart. Slowly, I held out my injured hand, and Adrian Vale knelt in front of me like a man lowering himself into a promise neither of us understood yet. His hands were warm. That was the first thing I noticed when Adrian unwrapped the blood-stained handkerchief from my palm. Warm, steady, careful in a way that made my chest ache for reasons I did not want to examine too closely. He did not rush. He did not wince. He only studied the cut with the focused calm of someone assessing damage without judgment. The lamp beside the sofa cast a low golden light over his face, catching the sharp line of his cheekbone, the dark sweep of his lashes, the faint crease between his brows as he reached for antiseptic. This will sting, he said. I nodded, but when the cool liquid touched the split skin, I still jerked on instinct. Adrian's fingers tightened only enough to steady me, not to restrain. Never that. You are safe here, he said quietly. 3 simple words. I had heard men say them before. Ryan had said them once, early on, when everything still looked polished from a distance. But Adrian said them like a fact, not a favor. Like the room itself would answer to him if it failed me. I stared at the top of his head because looking directly at him felt too dangerous in a completely different way. He was kneeling in front of me in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled back, expensive watch glinting at his wrist, city lights flickering beyond the windows behind him, and nothing about this made sense. Men like Adrian Vale did not appear out of storms and offer tea and first aid to women like me. Men like Adrian Vale belonged to another universe entirely. You keep waiting for me to do something, he said after a moment. His voice was mild, but it landed with impossible accuracy. My breath caught. I am cleaning your hand. He glanced up then, dark eyes meeting mine with devastating steadiness. That is all. Heat rose to my face, part embarrassment, part the old humiliation of being seen too clearly. I am sorry, I whispered. Adrian returned his attention to the bandage he was wrapping around my palm with precise, economical motions. For what? For bleeding on your couch. For bringing trouble to your door. For trembling every time a man lifts his voice. For being the kind of woman who stayed too long and ran too late. The list crowded my throat until it hurt. For being here, I said finally. That made him pause. Not long. Just enough for me to notice. Claire, he said, and hearing my first name in that low-measured tone made something in me still. The only person who should be sorry tonight is the man who made you believe you need to apologize for surviving. I looked at him then, really looked, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. No one had ever said something like that to me. Not my mother, who taught me to keep the peace. Not my friends, who stopped calling when I kept defending him. Certainly not me. Adrian finished securing the bandage and let his hand linger beneath mine for half a heartbeat before releasing it completely, as if he understood that even kindness needed an exit. Marta set a mug of tea on the low table beside me, the scent of chamomile and honey curling into the air. I wrapped my uninjured hand around the porcelain, grateful for the heat, for the task, for something to hold. Adrian rose in one smooth motion and crossed to the bar near the windows, pouring himself what looked like water. Or maybe something stronger. His reflection stared back at us from the glass, all dark lines and control. "Do you have somewhere safe to go in the morning?" he asked. Morning. The word felt unreal. I had not thought beyond the next red light, the next text message, the next place to hide. "I do not know," I admitted. "A friend, maybe. But he knows most of the people I still talk to." Adrian was silent for a beat too long. "And your family?" I laughed before I could stop myself, a brittle, ugly sound. "My mother lives in Arizona with husband number 4. We speak on holidays if one of us remembers." He nodded once, as if filing the information away with everything else. Then his phone buzzed on the mantel. One of the men downstairs, I assumed. Adrian checked the screen, and the temperature in the room seemed to change. Not sharply, subtly, like a door had opened somewhere I could not see. "What is it?" I asked before I could stop myself. He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked at me with that same unreadable calm. "Your ex did not go home," he said. "He parked across the street and has been sitting there for the last 12 minutes. For one strange second, all I could hear was the soft clink of porcelain as the cup rattled against the saucer in my hands. I had not even realized I was shaking that hard until the sound gave me away. Across the room, Adrian went completely still. Not surprised, not alarmed, just still in that precise, dangerous way I was beginning to understand meant his mind had already moved 3 steps ahead of everyone else's. "How do you know?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. Adrian walked toward the windows, not to look out directly, but to check the reflection in the dark glass. The city shimmered beyond him, all rain and steel and distant headlights smeared by the storm. "Because nothing sits across from my building for 12 minutes without being noticed," he said. The answer should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it sounded like architecture, a fact built into the walls. My stomach dropped anyway. I set the tea down before I spilled it all over Marta's immaculate tray. "He is waiting for me." Saying it out loud made everything feel smaller and worse at the same time, like fear shrinks the room but sharpens every edge inside it. Adrian turned back to me. "He is waiting for an opening," he corrected. "He will not get one." The certainty in his voice should have comforted me. It did, a little. That was the problem. I did not know this man. I had been inside his penthouse for less than an hour, wearing rainwater and panic like a second skin, and somehow his confidence was already pressing against the cracks in me. Dangerous, I thought. Not because he might hurt me, but because he made safety sound possible. I wrapped my fingers around the bandaged palm in my lap and forced myself to breathe evenly. "You do not understand," I said. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Then explain it to me." I looked down at the pale rug beneath my shoes, at the dark wet outline I had left there, at anything except his face. The truth sat in my throat like glass. "He does this," I whispered. "If I leave, he waits. If I block him, he calls from another number. If I stay with someone, he makes it seem like concern. Flowers. Apologies. Messages about how worried he is. He knows how to look harmless when people are watching." Adrian said nothing, and that silence pulled more from me than questions would have. "Then if nobody is watching," I continued, hearing my own voice from a distance, "he changes. Not all at once. That would have been easier to name. It was little things first. Who I texted, what I wore, why I took too long at work, why I needed friends he did not approve of. By the time I realized every part of my life had to be translated into something that would not upset him, I could not remember when I had handed it over. The room felt too warm suddenly. Or maybe I was cold from the inside out. Adrian moved closer, but not too close, stopping beside the low table instead of looming over me. "How long?" he asked. 2 years. My laugh came out brittle again. Although the first 6 months looked like romance if you squinted hard enough. Adrian's jaw shifted once. A small movement. Tension controlled, not hidden. "And tonight?" I closed my eyes. The images came too fast. Ryan at the apartment door. His voice changing when he saw the packed bag. My car keys in my hand. Rain. Running. Tonight I told him it was over, I said. Really over. No more chances. No more conversations. I just wanted to leave before I lost my nerve. I swallowed. He followed me. Adrian took that in without interrupting, without filling the silence with false comfort or empty outrage. He listened the way powerful men rarely do, with his full attention and no visible need to make the moment about himself. Did he threaten you? He asked at last. I hesitated, and that hesitation answered more than words could have. Adrian saw it. Of course he saw it. He crouched slightly then, lowering himself enough that I did not have to crane my neck to meet his eyes. Claire. My name in his mouth sounded calm enough to hold on to. I need the truth, not because I doubt you, but because I protect what I understand. What I protect. Not who. What. The phrasing should have bothered me. Instead it wrapped around something raw inside me and steadied it. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time that night, I said the part one had not even admitted to myself until now. He told me if he could not have me back, then he would make sure nobody else ever got the version of me he built. The air went silent. Adrian did not blink, did not curse, did not ask me to repeat it. He only straightened slowly, every line of him turning colder. Then he reached for his phone again and said, in a voice so quiet it made my pulse stutter, that was the wrong thing for him to say while sitting outside my home. Adrian did not step away when he made the call. He stood a few feet from me, phone to his ear, gaze fixed on the rain-swept glass as if the city itself were a problem waiting to be arranged into obedience. I want the car across the street gone, he said. His tone did not rise. It did not need to. No scene. No mistakes. And if he returns tonight, he does not get within half a block of this building. A pause. Yes. Quietly. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket with the same unhurried precision he seemed to do everything with. I stared at him, tea cooling forgotten beside me, my heart beating too fast for a room that looked this calm. Who are you? I asked again, softer this time, because now I was not asking for a name. Adrian turned from the window, and for the first time since I had met him, something like weariness passed across his face. Not weakness, just the tired expression of a man who had long ago accepted that his life required explanations other people never wanted to hear in full. A man who is very difficult to reach without permission, he said. Your ex just learned that the hard way. That was not really an answer, and we both knew it. Still, I did not push. Something in his tone told me the truth would come in pieces, not because he enjoyed mystery, but because men like Adrian were built in layers for survival. Marta reappeared carrying a folded bundle of clothes, cream and charcoal, and impossibly soft-looking. For Miss Bennet, she said, setting them on the arm of the sofa. The guest suite is ready whenever she wishes. Guest suite. The phrase sounded unreal, like something from a movie I would normally turn off halfway through, because women like me were never the ones who ended up in penthouses with private staff and wardrobes appearing out of nowhere. I cannot stay, I said, even as every exhausted part of me leaned toward the possibility of it. Adrian's expression did not shift. You can. I should not. That is a different argument. I hated that he was right. I hated that my first instinct, even now, was to make myself small enough to leave no burden behind. You do not know me, I said. No, Adrian replied. But I know enough. He crossed the room and stopped near the fireplace, close enough that I could feel his presence but not trapped by it. I know you ran instead of staying where you were unsafe. I know you still apologize for taking up space. I know you looked relieved when he left and terrified even after. His eyes held mine. Dark and exacting and impossible to escape. That tells me more than your file ever could. My breath snagged on the last word. My file. Adrian glanced away for half a second, as if annoyed with himself for saying too much. Basic information, he said. Marta had your purse brought up from your car. I had someone identify you in case medical care was needed. I should have been offended. Maybe in any other moment I would have been. But tonight, after being hunted through a storm and cornered by the wreckage of my own choices, the idea that someone had made sure I had a name and a history and not just a bleeding hand felt strangely comforting. That is invasive, I said anyway, because I needed to hold on to some version of normal. Adrian's mouth curved slightly. And yet useful. I almost smiled. Almost. It vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion pressing behind my eyes. Marta stepped closer then, her voice gentle in a way that did not ask for anything. Miss Bennett, the shower is warm. The room locks from the inside, and no one enters without your permission. Something in me cracked at that. Not dramatically, not enough to make noise. Just a small internal break, the kind that happens when your body hears the words it has needed for too long. The room locks from the inside. I looked at Adrian. You would really let me stay here? He held my gaze without hesitation. Tonight, he said, you will sleep somewhere no one can reach you. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline again, distant now, almost fading. But beneath that, from somewhere far below on the street, I heard the low growl of an engine starting and pulling away. Adrian heard it too. His attention shifted toward the window for one brief second before returning to me. It seems, he said quietly, your problem has been encouraged to leave. I had not realized how tired I was until the guest room door closed behind me and silence rushed in like a tide. Not empty silence. Safe silence. The kind with thick carpet under my feet, rain tapping softly against distant glass, and no footsteps outside the door that made my stomach knot in preparation. I stood there for a long moment with the folded clothes Marta had given me pressed against my chest, staring at a room that looked like something from another person's life. The bed was enormous, dressed in charcoal linen smooth enough to look untouched. A lamp glowed on the nightstand, warm and low. Beyond an open doorway, the bathroom shimmered with pale marble and steam already ghosting across the mirror from the shower she had turned on for me. Everything was prepared, anticipated. No one in my world had ever anticipated my comfort before. I locked the door twice even after Marta had promised no one would enter without permission. Old habits. Survival rituals. Then I stood beneath water, so hot it almost hurt, and let the rain of the night wash into the drain along with mascara, fear, and the city grit still clinging to my skin. My bandaged hand throbbed dully when the steam touched it, but the ache felt far away compared to the one in my chest. I had left with one duffel bag and a cracked sense of dignity. I had ended up in a penthouse belonging to a man whose name carried weight, even when he said almost nothing. Adrian Vale. I repeated it in my head while I dried off with a towel softer than anything I owned. The name sounded old money and sharp edges, a name that belonged on buildings or legal documents or whispered warnings. Not in the mouth of a frightened woman standing in borrowed clothes in the middle of the night. The sweater Marta left for me was cream-colored cashmere, absurdly soft, and the drawstring pants were too long, bunching around my ankles. I looked in the mirror and almost laughed at the sight. Claire Bennett, 27 years old, assistant event coordinator with overdue rent, standing in clothes that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. But the laugh never fully came. My phone had been in my purse, and my purse had been brought up from the car. That fact waited for me on the bathroom counter like a test I had been avoiding. When I finally picked it up, the screen lit my face in the dim room and nearly knocked the breath out of me. 23 missed calls. 31 text messages. Most from Ryan. A few from unknown numbers I knew were not really unknown at all. My thumb hovered. Then I opened the thread anyway because some part of me was still wired to anticipate the emotional weather before it hit. The first messages were exactly what I expected. Where are you? Pick up. We need to talk. Then the apologies. I was upset. You know I do not mean it when I get angry. Come home, and we will fix this. After that came the turn. You are humiliating me. Do not make me come find you again. If you think some stranger can protect you, you do not understand how this works. My pulse kicked hard enough to make the phone tremble in my hand. I read the last line 3 times before the room blurred around it. He had always known how to make a threat sound like a prediction, as if he were simply describing gravity. I should have turned the phone off. Instead, I did what women do when fear and conditioning braid themselves together too tightly to separate. I started typing, not to answer him, to answer the version of myself that still thought explanation might buy peace. I got as far as do not contact me again before there was a knock at the door. Light. Controlled. Not Ryan. Still, my whole body seized. Claire. Adrian's voice came through the wood, low and even. Do not open it if you do not want to. But Marta noticed your phone is active again, and I thought you should know he has begun calling the front desk under a false name. I stared at the door, every nerve pulled tight. What did you tell them? I asked. That no one reaches this floor without my permission. His answer came immediately, without hesitation, the verbal equivalent of a lock sliding into place. My throat tightened around something that felt dangerously close to tears. He will keep trying, I said. There was a pause on the other side, brief and measured. So will I, Adrian replied. The difference is that I am better at this than he is. I closed my eyes. That should have terrified me. A sane woman would have heard warning bells in every word. But all I felt was the first small crack in the panic that had been living under my ribs for months. I unlocked the door, not all the way, just enough to see him standing in the hallway in dark trousers and the same white shirt, sleeves rolled, tie gone, looking less like a rescuer now and more like the dangerous man the city probably already knew him to be. His gaze dropped once to the phone in my hand, then returned to my face. Did he threaten you again? He asked. I could have lied. I almost did. But something about Adrian made lies feel pointless, like trying to hide smoke in a room already full of fire. Slowly, I handed him the phone. Adrian took the phone from my hand without touching my fingers, a small courtesy that should not have mattered as much as it did. He read the screen in silence, his expression giving away nothing at first, but I had started to recognize the subtle shifts in him. The slight tightening at the corner of his mouth, the stillness that deepened rather than softened. He was angry. Not loudly, not theatrically, the kind of anger that did not spill, the kind that settled. When he looked up, his eyes were darker than before. He is trying to make fear sound reasonable, he said. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. That is his specialty. Adrian handed the phone back to me, then leaned one shoulder against the door frame as if he had no intention of leaving until he was certain I would not fall apart the second he did. The hallway light behind him cast a dim gold outline around his frame, sharp enough to make him look carved out of shadow and discipline. You were going to answer him, he said. It was not a question. Shame rose hot and quick. I was going to tell him not to contact me again. Adrian's gaze did not soften, but it did become more focused, as if he were choosing his next words with care. Men like that do not hear boundaries as endings. They hear them as invitations to negotiate. I hated how accurate that was. I hated even more that a stranger understood the pattern faster than I had after 2 years of living inside it. I wrapped my arms around myself, cashmere soft against skin that still felt too exposed. Then what am I supposed to do? The question came out smaller than I intended. Adrian glanced at the phone in my hand. Tonight? Nothing. You do not feed panic when it is begging for attention. He pushed away from the frame and stepped into the room only after I moved back half a step, giving silent permission. Even then, he stayed near the door, close enough to steady the moment, far enough not to crowd it. Tomorrow, he continued, we make decisions. Real ones. Not reactive ones at 1 a.m. Tomorrow again. The word felt slightly less impossible now, as if his presence had forced time to continue when my fear wanted everything frozen. I looked down at the unread messages still glowing on the screen. He is not going to stop. No, Adrian said. Not because he loves you. Because he has confused access with ownership. The sentence cut through me so cleanly it hurt. Access with ownership. That was exactly it. Ryan had never loved the parts of me that were alive and changing and difficult. He loved the version of me that made his life run smoother. The version that answered on the first ring. The version that rearranged itself around his moods and called it compromise. Adrian watched the understanding land in my face and did not rush to fill the silence after. He let it settle. Let me have it. Who are you really? I asked, because the question had grown too large to keep ignoring. Adrian exhaled once through his nose. Almost a soundless laugh, though nothing about his expression was amused. Someone your ex should have been smart enough not to bother. That is not an answer. It is the only one you need tonight. He was wrong, but I also knew he would not say more until he chose to. And men like Adrian clearly lived by rules that bent for no one. I should have found that infuriating. Instead I found it strange, this feeling of standing near a wall that would not move no matter how hard the world threw itself against it. My phone lit up again in my hand, the screen flashing with another incoming call from an unknown number. I flinched before I could stop myself. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. Put it on the table, he said. Face down. I did. The buzzing started almost immediately after the call ended. Then another, a desperate electronic pulse against polished wood. My pulse tried to match it. Adrian crossed the room, picked up the phone, and held out his hand. May I? The fact that he asked mattered. Maybe too much. I nodded. He pressed a few buttons with efficient ease, silencing the device completely before setting it back down. The room exhaled. So did I. There, he said quietly. He no longer gets to enter the room because he wants to. My eyes burned suddenly, and I looked away before that could become something more embarrassing. You make it sound easy. Adrian's voice came from closer now, though he still kept careful distance. No, I make it sound possible. I swallowed hard. Outside, the storm had softened to a steady whisper against the glass. Inside, the guest room felt warmer, smaller, safer than it had 10 minutes ago. Adrian glanced toward the hall, then back to me. Marta will sleep in the suite across from yours tonight, he said. If you need anything, you open the door, and she will hear you. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. He moved to leave, then stopped with one hand resting lightly on the door. Claire. I looked up. His gaze held mine with that same impossible steadiness, but this time there was something else in it. Not softness. Something rarer. Restraint chosen in service of care. Whatever he convinced you of, Adrian said, you are not difficult to protect. Then he stepped into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed behind him. Almost. As if he understood that tonight, even privacy needed to feel like it had not become abandonment. I stood there in the quiet for a long moment, staring at the narrow strip of golden light left by the door. And for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, sleep began to feel less like surrender and more like mercy. I did sleep. Not well, not deeply, but enough to wake in pieces instead of panic. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. No television murmuring from another room. No footsteps pacing outside the bedroom door. No phone vibrating across a nightstand like a warning I was expected to answer. Just the soft hum of central air and pale morning light filtering through the curtains in clean silver stripes. For a moment I forgot where I was, and that blank second felt almost luxurious. Then memory returned all at once. The storm. The garage. Adrian. Ryan parked across the street like a threat that had learned patience. I sat up too quickly, the borrowed blanket sliding into my lap, and my bandaged hand pulsed in dull protest. On the nightstand beside the bed sat a glass of water, 2 pain relievers, and a folded card in careful handwriting. Breakfast whenever you are ready. Marta. No pressure. The no pressure almost undid me more than the kindness itself. I dressed slowly in the clothes Marta had left, and opened the door to find the hallway empty, warm with early sun and faintly scented with coffee. The penthouse looked different in daylight. Less shadow, more scale. Clean lines, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan like a private painting. It should have felt cold, too perfect to be lived in, but it did not. It felt controlled, deliberate, like every object had earned its place by being useful, beautiful, or both. I followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen, where Marta stood arranging fruit on a white plate with the kind of precision that suggested she could probably run a country if someone gave her 24 hours and a decent pen. Good morning, Miss Bennett, she said, as if women appeared in borrowed cashmere in Adrian Vale's guest wing every day of the week. You slept. It was not a question. A little. My voice still sounded fragile around the edges. That is more than I expected. Marta gave me a small nod, one that managed to hold sympathy without sliding into pity. Mr. Vale is in his study. He said to tell you breakfast comes first unless the building is on fire. Despite everything, a smile tugged at my mouth. Is that his usual policy? With everyone except himself. She set a mug in front of me, dark roast. With cream already added, somehow exactly how I drank it. I stared at it. How did you know? I did not, Marta said. But Mr. Vale noticed you take milk in your tea and dislike bitterness. Of course he had. The realization should have felt invasive. Instead it landed as one more impossible detail in a night full of them. I sat at the kitchen island, wrapped both hands around the coffee mug, and watched rainwater still sliding down the windows in thin, clear trails. The storm had passed, but the streets below still glistened dark and slick, the whole city looking scrubbed raw. Did he come back? I asked quietly. Marta did not pretend not to understand who I meant. No, she said. Not after he was persuaded that waiting nearby was unwise. Persuaded. Such a neat word. It told me nothing and enough at the same time. Before I could ask more, footsteps sounded behind me. Not rushed. Never rushed. Adrian entered the kitchen in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, hair still slightly damp from a shower, looking less like a man who had spent part of his night protecting a stranger and more like the sort of person who moved markets before 9 in the morning. His gaze found me immediately, then dropped to the coffee in my hands, the plate in front of me, the color in my face. Assessing. Cataloging. You look better, he said. No good morning. Somehow that felt more intimate. I look awake, I corrected. Adrian's mouth shifted as if he appreciated the distinction. He crossed to the espresso machine, poured himself a cup, then leaned one hand on the counter across from me. There is something you should know before today begins, he said. The tone in his voice erased the fragile comfort of breakfast in an instant. My fingers tightened around the mug. What? Adrian held my gaze steadily, dark eyes unreadable in the morning light. At 7:15, your ex filed a missing persons report. For a second, I forgot how to hold the mug. My fingers went numb around the ceramic, and hot coffee lapped over the rim onto my skin before I felt it. Marta moved at once, setting a linen napkin in front of me, but Adrian was already there, taking the cup from my hands before it could slip. Easy, he said low and controlled. The way someone talks to a skittish animal that has learned sudden movement means danger. I hated that my body responded to his calm before my pride could catch up. A missing persons report? I repeated. The words sounded absurd in my own voice, brittle and almost laughable. He knows exactly where I was last night. Adrian set the mug down out of reach and slid the napkin toward me. He also knows how to construct concern on paper. To anyone looking in from the outside, he is a worried boyfriend reporting unusual behavior after an argument. I pressed the linen against my fingers even though the coffee had barely touched me. It gave me something to do. Can he do that? Adrian's expression did not change. Anyone can file one. The question is whether it holds. He paused, then added. He told them you left distressed, that you were not answering calls, and that you may be in the company of someone dangerous. I let out one stunned, humorless breath. Someone dangerous. Adrian's gaze met mine across the kitchen island. His phrasing, not mine. It should have frightened me more than it did, hearing Adrian confirm the word without denying it. But by then I understood something important about fear. It was not always attached to the most powerful man in the room. Sometimes it belonged to the one who knew exactly how weak you had become and used that knowledge like a key. What happens now? I asked. Adrian straightened, coffee untouched beside him, every line of his body composed in a way that made the room feel steadier just by contrast. Now you decide whether you want to correct the story or disappear from it for a while. I stared at him. Disappear? Temporarily, he said. Legally, quietly, and somewhere your ex cannot orbit. My pulse kicked again. You are talking like this is normal. For my world, Adrian said, this barely qualifies as a morning inconvenience. The statement should have sounded monstrous. Instead it sounded like truth from a life I had only glimpsed from the edges. I looked down at my bandaged hand, at the white wrap against my skin, at the evidence that the night had happened exactly the way I remembered it. I cannot vanish, I said. I have a job, bills, a landlord who already thinks I am late because I am irresponsible instead of underpaid. Adrian listened without interrupting. That, more than anything, made me keep going. And if the police show up here asking questions, what am I supposed to say? That I spent the night in a billionaire stranger's penthouse because my ex followed me through a storm? Adrian's mouth shifted slightly. I am not a billionaire stranger anymore. We have shared coffee and a crisis. I stared at him. Against all reason, a startled laugh escaped me. Small, disbelieving, but real. Marta hid a smile as she quietly refreshed the sugar bowl, as if this kitchen hosted emotional collapses and dry humor every Tuesday. Adrian watched my face for a second longer than necessary, and something unreadable passed through his eyes before the seriousness returned. Claire, he said, more gently now. This is the part where men like him usually regain control. Not by force. By narrative. He will call you unstable, confused, influenced. He will make your exit sound like a symptom instead of a decision. Every word hit too close to home. I had lived inside Ryan's version of events for so long that hearing someone else map it out in advance felt like stepping outside a maze and seeing the pattern from above. So what do? I asked again. Adrian rested one hand on the counter between us, not reaching for me, just grounding the space. You tell the truth before he finishes decorating the lie. My throat tightened. To the police? To whoever needs it, Adrian said. But you will not do it alone. Something in me recoiled at that automatically. Alone had become my religion, my punishment, my proof that I had made my own mess and therefore had to clean it up without witnesses. Adrian saw the resistance in my face and lowered his voice another degree. Protection is not the same as control, Claire. The room went very still. Marta set down the fruit bowl and slipped out without a sound, leaving the morning light, the smell of coffee, and that sentence hanging between us. Protection is not the same as control. No one had ever said it to me so plainly. No one had ever looked me in the eye and separated the two as if I had the right to demand the difference. I swallowed hard. And if I say I want to handle this myself? Adrian's expression did not harden. It became something more difficult. Respectful. Then I make sure you can, he said. But first, I need you to know exactly whose roof you are standing under, because if Ryan keeps pushing, he is not just pushing at you anymore. Adrian held my gaze for so long that I became aware of everything at once. The low hum of the refrigerator, rainwater still whispering down the glass, the faint heat from the coffee mug warming the counter between us. Then he spoke, and his voice carried none of the performance I had come to expect from powerful men. My businesses are legitimate on paper, he said. Real estate, shipping, security, hospitality. Enough to keep accountants happy and reporters guessing. He paused, not because he was uncertain, but because he was deciding how much truth I could carry before breakfast. What exists underneath that is less polite? I said nothing. I did not need a chart. I did not need a confession wrapped in details. The men downstairs, the silence around his name, the way Ryan had retreated without understanding why, but sensing enough to know he should. All of it had already been speaking. Adrian watched realization move across my face and did not insult me by pretending otherwise. Some people call me many things, he continued. Most of them do not do it to my face. What matters to you is simpler. The building is secure. The staff are loyal. The men outside answer to me. If someone wants to reach you here, they do not do it by accident. My mouth felt dry. You are telling me you are dangerous. Adrian's expression remained unreadable, but there was no denial in it. I am telling you I understand men who mistake fear for devotion. That landed harder than any dramatic admission could have. It was not just what he was. It was what he knew. I looked down at the untouched fruit on my plate, bright berries and perfect slices of pear arranged with more care than most people gave to a whole conversation. And you think that makes me safer? I know it does, Adrian said. The question is whether you can live with the method. Silence stretched between us, not hostile, just heavy with consequence. A sane person would have left right then. A sane person would have thanked him for the shelter, called the police herself, and walked back into ordinary danger because at least it came with familiar rules. But ordinary danger had nearly swallowed me whole. Ordinary danger wore good shoes, said the right things in public, and filed missing persons reports at 7:15 in the morning. Adrian's world might have been darker, but it did not bother pretending to be harmless. There was something brutally honest in that. Why me? I asked quietly. Why get involved at all? Adrian looked almost surprised by the question. Not offended. Just surprised that I would ask it as if kindness needed to be justified. Then the surprise faded into something older and more private. Because you were bleeding in the rain and still apologizing, he said. Because when he spoke to you, you folded inward before he got close enough to touch you. Because I have seen that look before, and I do not ignore it. His answer stripped the room down to its bones. No grand declaration. No possessive claim. Just recognition. I felt my throat tighten around emotion I did not trust. You barely know me. Adrian's gaze softened by a degree so small I might have imagined it if I were not watching him so closely. I know enough to know this is the moment your life either narrows again or opens. He straightened then, every inch of him returning to control. Here are your options. You can leave this apartment today with an escort. Go somewhere of your choosing, and I will make sure you are not followed. You can stay here temporarily while legal and practical arrangements are made. Or you can let me build distance between you and the man who thinks he owns your future. He let each choice settle before continuing. None of them require you to belong to me. None of them require gratitude. They require only honesty. I stared at him. at the clean certainty in his posture, at the terrifying ease with which he spoke about moving obstacles as if they were furniture, at the fact that for the first time in years, a man was offering me options instead of shrinking them. "And what do you get out of it?" I asked. Adrian glanced toward the window, where the clouds were finally breaking over Manhattan in strips of pale blue. "Peace of mind," he said. Then he looked back at me, and there was something in his expression now that made my pulse stumble for reasons fear could not fully explain. And perhaps the chance to see what kind of woman stands up once she realizes no one is allowed to push her back down. The words settled into me like heat. Dangerous heat. Not because they promised romance or rescue. Because they asked for something harder. A self I had not been allowed to become. My phone, still silenced on the counter, lit up once more with another incoming call from a number I did not recognize. Ryan again. Or one of the friends he used when his own name stopped working. I looked at the screen, then at Adrian. He did not move toward the phone, did not reach for it. The choice was mine. That, more than anything else, made my next breath feel different. Steadier. I turned the phone over with my own hand, face down against the marble, and when I looked back up, Adrian gave one slow nod, as if he had just watched a door lock from the inside. "Good," he said quietly. "Now we can begin." The moment I turned the phone face down, something inside me shifted so quietly I almost missed it. No thunder, no dramatic rush of courage, just a small internal click, like a lock finally catching after years of sitting half-broken. Adrian saw it. I knew he saw it because his expression changed in that subtle way I had come to recognize, the severe line of his mouth easing by a fraction, the tension in his shoulders settling not from relief, but from decision. He reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket, withdrew a slim leather card case, and set one embossed card on the marble between us. No flourish, no speech, just an address in Tribeca, a name for a discreet attorney, and a second name for a woman who specialized in protective orders and relocation support. "These are the first calls," he said. "Only if you want them made." I looked at the card, then at him. "And if I do not?" Adrian lifted his coffee at last, took one measured sip, and set it down untouched again as if caffeine were merely a habit he tolerated out of politeness. "Then I still make sure you get to your apartment, your office, and anywhere else you need to be without being followed. I told you before, Claire. Options, not cages." The word hit something raw in me. Cages. Ryan had never used locks. He had used guilt, urgency, endless explanations, the constant rewriting of my feelings until I stopped trusting my own. Adrian, for all the danger humming quietly beneath his name, stood in front of me offering exits instead of walls. I picked up the card with my bandaged hand, studied the heavy paper, the crisp black letters, the confidence built into something so small. "If I do this," I said slowly, "if I tell the truth, if I stop covering for him, everything changes." Adrian did not blink. Yes. No false comfort. No soft lie about how easy healing would be or how neat justice might look in the daylight. Just yes. Somehow that honesty steadied me more than reassurance could have. I slipped the card into the pocket of the borrowed cashmere pants and let out a breath that felt like the end of a very long stair climb. "Then I want to start." Adrian gave one short nod, the kind men in charge probably used when entire fortunes shifted because they had decided a thing was now in motion. But there was nothing cold in it this time. Only respect. "Good," he said. "Marta will bring your purse and make a list of anything you need collected from your apartment. You will not go there alone." "Adrian." He paused. Thank you felt too small, too polite for the scale of what he had placed in front of me. Safety. Choice. The possibility of a future that did not require flinching every time my phone lit up. He seemed to understand anyway. His gaze held mine, steady and dark and impossible to mistake now. "Do not thank me yet," he said quietly. "The hard part is not leaving. It is refusing to go back when the loneliness starts sounding like love." The truth of that settled deep. I looked toward the windows then, toward the washed silver skyline of Manhattan opening under a clearing sky. The storm had passed, but the streets still shone with its memory. Down below, tiny from this height, traffic had begun to move again. People going to work. Deliveries being made. Ordinary life continuing as if nothing had happened. And maybe that was the strangest part. My world had split open in one night, and the city had not even paused to notice. Adrian followed my gaze to the glass. He will try again, he said. Not a threat. Not a warning meant to frighten me. A fact. Probably in a new suit, with a better story. I nodded. Then he will find a different Claire. Adrian turned back to me fully, and for the first time since I had stumbled bleeding into his garage, his eyes warmed with something unmistakable. Approval. Maybe even pride. It should not have mattered. It mattered anyway. He stepped closer then. Not enough to crowd me. Just enough to make the space between us feel charged with something larger than rescue and quieter than fate. That, he said, his voice low as the last whisper of rain against glass, is the first smart thing he never saw coming.